This session I put together, I think last fall, maybe last summer. I called it "The Words of the Prophet Are Written on Thee," and I'm talking about Tel Aviv street art. I don't know how many of you have been to Israel in the past 8 years, maybe 10 years, but it's become a new thing that street art, in contrast to graffiti, is something interesting, colorful, an additional component of Tel Aviv. And it's fascinating because we don't have street art in Jerusalem that we could have a tour on. There's lots of, in certain neighborhoods, ads and notices on billboards about what this rabbi, that rabbi says, but we don't have any real sense of street art. But Tel Aviv has lots and lots of it, and you've probably been to Miami and other places in the world where there are entire neighborhoods where not graffiti per se, but street art. And the place to do this in Tel Aviv, or to see most of this, the heaviest concentration, is in a neighborhood called Florentine. That's me. Sorry, I didn't have my Blackhawks hat on at the time, but I'm standing in front of, and most of these are pictures that my wife and I took when we went, spent a day together, still in the midst of COVID. So I want to say the summer or the fall of 2021, maybe. And if I were to go back there, and I am going back, I think on Saturday for the first time in a while, I'll see some new things that weren't there beforehand, and maybe some things have been painted over. But you can see the beautiful art over here, the hearts, the beautiful flower of the cyclamen. And then there's a picture over here, and it says, you can say a circle that says, Tselem oti liyad hagraffiti achadash. Take a picture of me next to the new graffiti. And it's interesting because it's graffiti, this, but this is street art. There's a difference. And this is actually art because it's a stencil. It's not somebody writing their name with a big tag. It's actually trying to say something. Oh, now what's happening? People are taking selfies and they're coming to this neighborhood. So I took, of course, it wasn't a selfie because my wife took the picture, but whatever. And there I am standing in front of, you might recognize, the hipster, no more, no less than Theodor Herzl. Those of you who were with me when I did a while back in January, February, the 6-part series in the history of Zionism and Israel, we talk about Theodor Herzl. Here is Herzl in a hipster version on someone's door. Now, when it's painted on someone's door, they have to give permission for that. So a lot of what we're going to see are things that people gave permission for, not necessarily. But the idea of writing on the wall is something that is actually in our biblical tradition. People might not, what the Bible justifies people writing things on the wall. Heaven, that's a shanda. We can't do that. Well, guess what? In the Bible, in a book that most of you have probably never read, I have once or twice, and it's really perplexing. In fact, the people who read it most are evangelical Christians, because it's this kind of mystical interpretation of whatever. But there's a line where the king's wise men came. They couldn't read the writing and make known its meaning to the king. And from that moment, this concept of writing on the wall, some strange text appears, and the king can't understand it, so he calls in his soothsayers to try to figure it out. And of course, as you walk around the streets of Tel Aviv, again, you'll see all these tags of people, but then you'll notice somebody has written up here in English, this is Tel Aviv, the words of the prophets are written on the subway walls, and maybe they were Israeli and they didn't know what a tenement is. I don't know. But subway, there aren't any subways in Israel as well. But this is part of the street art / graffiti. You'll notice over here, there is in front of a hummus joint in this neighborhood. In the neighborhood, I probably should put a map up here. It doesn't matter. South Tel Aviv, Florentine, somewhere between Jaffa and the area of Neve Tzedek, for those who have been there. And it's a up and coming area that is in the process. So I got to get a tissue in a process of being gentrified. And of course, as you know, in gentrified neighborhoods, you have the young people moving in, and then the LGBT community moving in, and then artists moving in, and then there's some families in those groups as well. Some artists actually have families, some gay people actually have children. Like there's hello, and the neighborhood begins to change, and it's actually quite a desirable neighborhood to live in. A little bit edgy, but a lot of young people want to live there. There's a hummus joint, and outside the hummus joint, you can see there's the hummus right there, the garbanzo beans, all in the picture, and there is this. It used to be a face, and actually some putz, which is a Hebrew word for putz, decided to put his or her name on it. And you'll notice up above there's Hebrew. Can you see the Hebrew? I put it in a little textual box there. And it says, and I will say it in my classic biblical Hebrew reading language, or voice. וילבש יוסף את כותונת הפסים וירד השוקה. So, וילבש יוסף את כותונת הפסים, and Joseph will put on his multicolored raincoat, right? This is the story of biblical Joseph. וירד השוקה, because, right, Joseph was clearly the only fashionista in the book of Genesis. I think it's Joseph. He actually wore a really nice set of clothes that his dad gave him because he was most favorite. וירד השוקה, and he went down to the market, to the shuk. ויאכל צלחת chimtzer, and he shall eat a plate of chimtzer, which is Aramaic for hummus. Oh, So it's not just a hummus joint, but they're trying to say that even in the ancient times, our ancestors, this really cool dude who dressed in the fancy, clothes, as you can see interpreted by the street artist, went down to this restaurant to actually eat hummus. Which brings me to another part of our Bible, and that is the story of the prophets, the Isaiah, the Jeremiah, the Ezekiel. What did they do? They engaged in what I call the 5 W's. They watched our behavior. They warned us about our behavior. You should not marry those pagans. You should not hang out with those uncircumcised. You should not do this. You should. And then they worried about our fate because of our behavior. They then waited for us to be punished for our behavior or repent. We had the choice. And then finally they wrote. They wrote about how we were punished for our behavior. And that really began this notion, I think, of writing on the wall and giving a message somehow in some sort of medium, public media, now it's social media, but public media, public space, in order to say something that you want other people to adhere to, believe, listen to, follow, whatever. The oldest street art / graffiti that we have in Israel, you might have seen, is actually in Jerusalem on the Western Wall. I'll repeat that, on the Western Wall, not the prayer area where you've all been, but the section just to the south of that, where Robinson's Arch is, the egalitarian section. And there you can see in Hebrew, you can't, I've circled it, it's Hebrew writing. It's probably Hebrew writing from about the 330s of the Common Era, when a young man, probably, maybe a woman, takes a ladder and climbs up to this stone. I've circled it over here. So this is a close-up on the left, and this on the right is exactly where it is situated, but you can't really see it on that stone, so I did a close-up. And here is the Hebrew writing as it appears. It is a quote from the book of Isaiah, and it says, "You shall see, and your heart shall rejoice, and their bones like grass shall flourish." Probably a misquote from the Bible intended to reflect upon this messianic fervor that was happening in a very short period of a ruler, a Roman ruler, who instead of being a Byzantine Christian, returned to paganism and wanted the Jews to join him, and actually said to the Jewish people, "Hey, I'm going to help you build the temple in Jerusalem." And this Jew said, "Wow, this is crazy. This must be the Messianic era. I mean, the Romans destroyed the temple. The Byzantine Christians are building their church, and now there's a Byzantine pagan emperor who wants to ally with us. Fantastic." So it's there in Jerusalem, somebody writing this on the wall. What is the difference between street art? You might remember Kilroy was here, that the American GIs wrote across Europe, right? It's not me, soldier number, this name, whatever, but Kilroy, which means an American, a GI was here, versus street art of the modern era. Perhaps the most famous street artist is Banksy, this mysterious, probably English artist who now gets millions of dollars for commissions to paint these things. This, I want to say, is somewhere in New York, but that's Banksy. So that's street art that is trying to tell us something. Of course, the idea of writing on the walls is something that was made popular in our lifetime. And some of us are old enough to remember a group called Simon and Garfunkel. And in their album, which came out in the mid-60s, so about when I was born, they have this great song on it called "The Sounds of Silence." And listen to the lyrics, in case you forget them, of "The Sounds of Silence," played in Central Park in 1982 at their reunion concert. Musical interlude, we all like Simon and Garfunkel, but that notion of, go next slide, sorry. Notion. And the people bowed and prayed. The notion of the words of the prophets are written on the subway walls. Well, they didn't write that back then in the book of Daniel, but this notion of how do you give a social message across, then where do you do it in a public space? And so in public spaces that aren't the center of town, there's lots of street art. As I mentioned, Banksy, I saw this a few years ago. I was in the Upper West Side in New York, and I was walking with a friend, and I noticed this thing on the wall, street art. There's Banksy. It's interesting, of course. It looks like they're trying to smash the water with a fire hydrant. And this is already South Tel Aviv. And oftentimes when I start with my groups, I begin in this neighborhood. It looks a little bit Banksy-esque, but it isn't. In fact, we even got the name of the artist. There it is, Kislev. That's the artist's name. And what do you notice in this picture? And by the way, this is one of those sessions where I'm going to ask some questions. And if you want to throw in something, when I say, what do you see? Then unmute yourself. We're a small enough group. Unmute yourself and answer if you want. Anybody, what do they see in this image here? Hearts, obviously. What else? Who is this figure?
Tinkerbell.
This is Tinkerbell. And what is Tinkerbell holding? paintbrushes, because
Yeah.
Tinkerbell is a street artist, of course, right? And she's flying up to heaven. And you might notice there's someone else who's at Peter Pan. She's following up over there, right? This is second and third, or third and fourth story of a building off of a parking lot. And it's clear that the artist did this. Now, you're not allowed to do street art, right? But you oftentimes will discuss with the owner of the house what you want to put up there. But on a wall like this, it belongs to someone. It doesn't belong to the artist. And the artist, in order to do this crazy story, had to rent a crane. And over a 2-day holiday, I think it was Rosh Hashanah, where the municipal inspectors weren't around, he literally came up there and he told people he was doing it. It was commissioned on behalf of the city, but there was nobody to speak to in the city to check it out. So he was able, with the crane, to put this up there. Massive picture of Tinkerbell. And what is Tinkerbell saying? It's a question for us. Notice the butterfly, of course, over here, but flying away, and you'll see him in a number of places. You'll see a number of artists who kind of repeat themselves throughout the area of Tel Aviv. These green eyes are everywhere. I actually noticed them, crazy enough, coming into Jerusalem the other day in a tunnel from where I live in Modi'in. These two green eyes, I'm like, oh, that's the same artist from Tel Aviv. And a big brother is watching you, perhaps, or big sister. And then you see this stuff, not as much. This is the tagging. This is graffiti, in contrast to street art. And the artist has a message. Did Mike interpret it correctly or not? I don't know. But you see these eyes everywhere, and the eyes see you everywhere. Keep that in mind. Not just the CCTV cameras, but these green eyes. And you notice, anybody read the Hebrew here? Now, when Hebrew is written, and you'll see it in a few pictures, it's presented differently. The language is a little bit different. But by the artist using vowels, and look at the Gimel, for those who read Hebrew in the Sheen, what type of text does this remind us of?
The Torah.
Biblical text. But we would see if we open up not a Torah from the Ark, because there are no vowels, right? But the font maybe. But this may be what we would see in the Chumash, the 5 books of Moses that appear in our pews. Anybody want to venture a guess as to what this says in Hebrew? I'll give you a clue. It's not a Hebrew word. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosha. Oh my gosh. Like, oh my gosh, it's an exclamation mark. And this appears by the same artist in a number of places all around the league. But it's amazing because the language is clearly Hebrew, obviously, and it's biblical by the way it's written. And it totally takes you for a twist because it's this ancient holy language that has now used to express this, oh my gosh, in English in the streets of Tel Aviv. It tells us a lot about what the language of the street is, not just Hebrew. And as I said earlier, what languages do we see? We see some interesting things here. And if you notice, but on the top of the screen, I put an arrow there, some braille. There's one street artist who isn't blind, but he, she, I don't know who it is, has put up in a number of places, and I don't read braille, but if you're blind, you can read it. But there's only one problem. That's about 12 feet high. So no blind person is going to come and touch it. So the artist is trying to tell us something what the people see who are looking at something but aren't actually able to read it, but the people who can't see it can't read it anyway. So interesting. And then you've got over here a little bit of Hebrew. It says Im Eshkachech Yerushalayim. It's also written in biblical style font, but there are no vowels. And there was something in English. We'll come back to this because we'll see a little bit later. I'll focus on this one piece. And then, as I said, you've got the tagging. And then you've got something else I saw about 6 months ago in the Levinsky market, and it's clearly Hebrew. It's hard to read even for me in Hebrew. The first words I'll read it. It says Ani, I, Asher Haiti, I that was, Ani Asher Hoveh, I that am, Ani Asher Ehyeh, I that will be. What does that remind you of? God communicating to Moses, right? It's Hebrew, but what does that say about me? Us, the parts of our community, I am here, and I will be, and I have been. So, but the language and the style of it, very kind of very influenced, I should say, but not as clear as the other biblical Hebrew. I said I'm going to focus on this quote. I have a whole slide of it. Can you read it now? It says in Hebrew without vowels, but the biblical style font with the sheen and the chet, right? In eshkachech Yerushalayim. Anybody recognize that?
It's the biblical. I'll lose my right hand if I.
Correct. If I forget thee, all right, Psalm 137. If I forget thee, O Jerusalem, and the rest of it should be tishkach yimini. Let my right hand, let me forget my right hand with her, and my tongue cling to the roof of my mouth. But it doesn't say that. What does the Hebrew say here? Can you read, Rick?
It's because of Tel Aviv.
In Hebrew, Zeh Biglal Tel Aviv. If I forget thee, O Jerusalem, in exile in Babylon, right? That's what our ancestors wrote, and that's what we say when we get married under the chuppah. But what is the artist saying? Listen, I'm really sorry, Jerusalem and the temple and the sanctity of the holy city, but the reason you're kind of back on the back burner and I've moved from Jerusalem is because of Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv has pulled me toward Tel Aviv. So it's biblical language that we need to know the language in order to understand it, the Hebrew, but we also need to understand the reference, and Israelis do. Even secular Israelis know exactly what we're talking about, where that text is coming from. Not too far away from there, I saw a picture of a sign written in 3 languages. You recognize the Hebrew, English, pedestrian walkway. And what's the language in the middle? It's Chinese to me. It is. Cantonese, Mandarin, whatever. It's Chinese. Why Chinese? Because the people working in that area, building the light rapid transit in Tel Aviv, are foreign workers from where? From China. So you learn a lot about the language and the style of text that's written anywhere, whether it's an official sign by the city. Why is it in that third language? Because it has to address the needs of the people who are working there. And this isn't just a linguistic, but it's a cultural and it's historical. There are many, many levels to understanding that particular text. Then you've got these crazy artists. And there's one artist who's done a bunch of these. I don't even know who the artist is. And you can see 2 figures with one of his motifs are 2 eyes. There are 3 eyes. I don't know why. But I don't know if you can see in the middle, there is Hebrew written. And it's very, very hard to understand because it's actually not Hebrew. It's using Hebrew letters because most people looking at it are Hebrew readers. And it says, the sound of silence. And if you can make that out. The sound of silence, right? Borrowing from the Simon and Garfunkel song. Or look at this one. Look at this one. You can see, and I looked at this picture and I'm like, oh, that's SpongeBob. I didn't understand it. And I came home, my wife and I was showing pictures to my kids. He's now 24-year-old. And he says, oh, but you don't know what that is? I'm like, no. First I thought maybe it had something with the gay pride because the colors here, but it's not quite the pride colors. And they said, you can't read that? I says, no, what? And it says, my milkshake brings all the boys to the yard. Some rap hip hop song. I don't know. I see. Wait a minute. Sarah, who's the musician? I don't know who it is, but do you know the song?
I do. It's I think it's Kellis, and I really know the song because of a Melissa McCarthy movie where she like is ridiculous dancing to it. It's hilarious.
So here's this artist who's making, who finds these great lines and he puts them up there, but they're English words, but they're written in Hebrew because it's like we have Hebrew transliterated in English for people who can't read the Hebrew alphabet. I'm embarrassed. It's my great nephew's bar mitzvah and I don't read Hebrew, but I've been called for an aliyah. I got to read it. So you've transliterated. This is the opposite. English transliterated into Hebrew. We've got another one over here. It's a bit hard to make the text out here. A man and woman are a couple again, and it says, here, Hey Yud Resh, here comes the rain again. Here comes the rain again, the Annie Lennox Eurythmic song. And what's the artist saying? I don't know. But using the language of Hebrew that people can read with some famous quotes. And this one is a funny one. It's a couple. There's Mr. Pickle or Ms. Pickle, I think, with 4 eyes here. And there's Mr. Wiener. Don't think the Wiener Circle. I know Chicago. I know what you're thinking of. It's not the same Wiener. I just want to clarify that. And what does it say? It says, you say yes, I say no. So having an argument, right? He's drinking, he's got a gun, violence, whatever, but something's going on there. An issue of domestic violence maybe, or coercion of the man over the woman. It's an issue the artist wants to quote a song and put that up there. And then you've got all these other weird ones, which are just art. I don't know if they're actually saying anything, but they're artists. A lot of these actually are taken. I don't know if you can see here, but these are storefronts in an area that is quite, used to be kind of low, and you'll see in the next picture, it used to be low industrial area of like a lot of carpentry shops. There's my wife, Michelle, and you can see all along this road here. There are actually a couple houses down over here, apartments, but most of these are carpentry shops. And this is where street artists, graffiti people come and just make all sorts of noise and mess and whatever else, and have these tabula rasas. Well, they're not these walls that they keep adding every single day to. Less street art, more graffiti over here. And then you'll notice on this road down about halfway, there's this beautiful unicorn, fake it till you make it. And it's amazing that somebody tagged it over here, but a lot of the street art has been there for years. It's just so pretty and so beautiful. Why bother taking it away? And even the taggers respect that, and they keep the nice art that's there. What are some of the themes that one comes across in this neighborhood? One big theme has to do with money, economics. This is a stencil. You can see. So the artist creates the stencil, and then I know the artist actually, he takes the stencil and a couple seconds black spray paint, moves on and puts this all over the neighborhood. Anybody recognize anything here? What's the first letter on the top? You have to unmute yourself, Sarah.
Hey,
Or Rick, it's a hey. But when you have a hey with that little apostrophe, what does that tell us? Hashem or God, right? You write God, hey, Hashem. And then it changes. The hey slowly turns into a kuf, it looks like over here, another Hebrew letter. And this piece morphs, the apostrophe morphs into the letter. By the time you get to the bottom, the hey, Hashem, God, has morphed or transmogrified, as they used to say in Bloom County, into
the symbol for a shekel.
exactly, not exactly a shekel, Rick. I will correct you. Sorry, it's
Shekel
the
Hadash.
Fantastic.
Hadash.
I didn't have to correct you. Fantastic. I'm glad that we have at least some Hebrew readers. Shekel Chadash, the new shekel from 1986. What is the artist perhaps telling us?
Materialistic society.
We've gone from worshiping Hashem to worshiping God Mammon, the god of wealth, right? So there's something about the transition of who we are. Or what about this one on the right? It's in Hebrew, and you see a pig, and there's that same shin chet, the shekel, the currency, like our dollar sign equivalent. And it says in Hebrew, Ma'apcha shel anashim neged capitalism mushchatim. What does it say in English? The revolution of the people against corrupt capitalists. So there are socialists there. There's no question that one of the biggest issues in Israeli society, in the news this morning I saw, is the increasing rise of real estate, 13% in the past year, the increasing inflation, the increasing cost of bread going at 20% this week. A lot of issues as the gap between rich and poor in Israel approaches that of America. So a lot of young people in Tel Aviv want to live in Tel Aviv. The only place they can afford is this grungy neighborhood. Thankfully for them, it's gentrifying, but maybe not thankfully for them. Maybe they can't afford the cost of rent in that neighborhood anymore. You've got a few other amazing pictures that one stumbles across. There is an artist who takes a lot of these famous paintings, Lady Liberty and the French Revolution over there, and I don't know if you can read it, but it says, I'm not really, and so we recognize the icon, right, with her breast exposed, liberty, equality, fraternity. I'm not really an anarchist. I just don't have enough. I'm just not, what was it say?
Wealthy?
Wealthy, thank you. I'm just not wealthy enough to be considered capitalist. And you can see the A for anarchy, right? So saying something about the revolution of the people, but there's another artist who put a stencil up. Anybody recognize any of the figures in this stencil? There are two.
Probably Netanyahu on the left and Robin Hood on the right.
Very impressive. Have you done this before, Rick? Very impressed.
Thank you.
Have you seen this? Have you walked around the neighborhood, Rick?
No.
No. So good you recognize Prime Minister, he's whatever. But this is Robin Hood. And what did Robin Hood do? Went Sherwood Forest and he stole from the rich and gave to the poor. And this on the left, one can recognize, as Rick did, the caricature of former Prime Minister Netanyahu, who was also finance minister. He was prime minister for 12 years. And what's in the valise? Probably money. Who's giving it to who? I think the artist is having Robin Hood bow down to Netanyahu and saying, here's the money from the poor to give to the rich, rather than the other way around. I don't think Netanyahu is giving money that he's collecting, but it's making a statement about rich and poor and the growing gap in Israeli society. And then a more favorite, actually saw it in another place on the Nachalat Binyamin Street Mall. For those who were there, I saw it a couple of weeks ago. You recognize the figure. Who's the figure? He's biblical. I'll give you a clue. See the similarity? That is David, the famous David created by Michelangelo. Actually, he didn't create it. Michelangelo just chipped away the marble, according to what he said, and there was David inside the marble. But there is David in wherever museum it is in Florence, and this is his version of David. But look at David. He's doesn't quite have that six-pack over there, right? He's a little bit more bloated. And what's he doing? He's got Nikes on, he's got Yves Saint Laurent, he's got some bling on, he's got King, which somebody told me is actually the name of a gang, I think, in Los Angeles, who knows. David in a very, very different situation. Again, what is he saying is an attack of capitalism. Our great leaders, they were muscular and larger than life, and we've got this bloated guy who focuses all on materialism. And that's me, of course, next to David, just to put in a sense of size proportion. So it's quite big, 5 or 6, probably 6 feet high. You got lots of economic issues. Then I discovered with my wife this amazing picture, which when I looked at it, I thought, well, you tell me, who is the figure and what is the skyline? Who is this figure? I wasn't sure. At first, I thought it might have been President Trump, and I thought it was Boris Johnson, the British Prime Minister. I don't know. What's the skyline? It's actually Tel Aviv. This is the Shalom Tower over there. So Migdal Shalom. So this is the skyline of Tel Aviv. It could be any city. And then I looked close at the description over here. I came home and I researched it, and sure enough, it's a German painting from 200 years ago by Caspar Friedrich. Wonder above Sea of the Fog. So, Wonder above the Sea of Fog. What's going on? Here's taking a picture. This statesman, politician, whatever, inspired by this great art, and is trying to tell us something maybe about the state of the present. My favorite from the artist are these two. Again, what is he trying to tell us? It's a painting of sheep, and where are they going? They're flocking literally to
McDonald's.
Okay, but they're sheep. What are sheep going to become? Do in McDonald's. They're going like sheep to the slaughter, right? So they see this big Mecca, this big M, and they're like, oh, what's that? Let's make our move over there. Coffee, too great. And little known to them, maybe it's an anti-meat, right? Maybe it's an anti-meat campaign. Maybe it's saying something about the herd mentality of people going like sheep to the slaughter. And then the last one, I think, from the artist over here is the modern version of Narcissus, although she's a she and not a he. Instead of falling in love with the image in the beautiful still body of water, you have someone, which never happens to any of us or any of our children or grandchildren. None of them spend too much time looking at images of themselves on Instagram and taking it and posting it and seeing how many links that they have. So a lot of the issues in society we've seen interpreted are kind of the frustration or anger. The message like, hello, slap you in the face. This is what you do when you're on Instagram the whole time and you walk into people. Some amazing art. Again, very, very different than a graffiti in some of the neighborhoods. Stunning art that is out there. So you've got your street art with messages, verbal messages, or visual messages. You've got just amazing art. There are a lot of pet stores in the neighborhood and a lot of dogs, by the way, a lot of young people who have lots of dogs. And then you've got lots and lots of other little messages. And you can see some are stencils over here, their dates. And it says here, for example, it's another stencil. It says, to a woman, if you, she, give up your voice, don't let them give up. Don't let them quiet your voice. Go out and vote. Something like that. All right, and then free love or something. I don't know. But these are stencils, different people, different artists. You can see what have I done to deserve you. Ground control to major douche. Oh, and this is a great one, which says down below. It's very, very hard to read. What does it say? It says Teshev Takum, and then it says Tavo. What does it say? Tavo Tikach. All right, it's biblical, whatever. Sit up and sit down. It's basically being driven crazy by, up and Johnny says up and down, Johnny says down. Anyway, street artists, different messages, stencils all over the neighborhood. Another artist has all these band-aids with all sorts of images and symbols that you see. There's another one you'll see over here. The exact same artist. A lot of these are band-aids, and it says in Hebrew, that's the artist name, Dede. I apologize. It says, he even signs it. So it's an artist. That, you don't need Bansky to sign it to know that it's a Bansky. This is Dede, lots of different places. And it says here in Hebrew, Shenifradni, when we separated, Miharti Abaita, I raced home, Nisheret Miachafatzim, I was careful of all the objects, Kfi Shalom Nisharti Meolam, as I never was cautious before. And is it broken love? Is it, who knows? But a message, street artist, it's a 3-4 story building. Clearly a lot of effort in order to build that. What else do we see? One common thread that appears a few times is Theodor Herzl, the founder of political Zionism, who had this great line, which was, Im tirtzu ein zo agada. If you will it, it is no dream. We just have to believe, get together, and we'll work toward creating a Jewish state. Fantastic. And what does this say? It says, lo rotzim, lo tzarich, right? Im tirtzu, if you will, And here he's saying, if you don't will it, if you don't want it, then you don't have to, right? You know what? Don't worry about creating a Jewish state. So maybe someone's saying, hey, we don't need a Jewish state, we need a democratic state. Herzl, everybody recognized the icon of Herzl, even appears on a number of beers here. And then you'll notice again, there's Herzl. There is that same transition from worshiping or following Hashem to worshiping Mammon, the god of money. Here you can see a grenade, but looks like it's shaped like an eagle. This is a stencil. And then, of course, you've got a Magen David. Now, if a synagogue in America, or a wall of a synagogue, would have a Star of David graffitied on the side, oh, it's a shanda. But here, it's a Jewish state. Hey, we can have stars painted on the walls of synagogues too. There's Herzl. You saw him already before. And next to Herzl is a sign written in Hebrew, not biblical style font, and it says Tluim Bagadot Bishvil Latet Tokef L'Sipur Shalanu. It's the name of the artist Shemesh. What does it say in English? It says we depend on legends or tales, agadot, in order to validate our story. What are they saying? Here we've got Herzl, who said, as I mentioned before, and here I put the Hebrew and English, Im tirtzu, if you will it, it is no dream. Im tirtzu ein zo agada. Agada, legend or a tale. And here it says, we depend on legends in order to validate our own story. What is maybe the street artist suggesting about the nature of Israeli society and our use of myths, our use of legends? Masada shall never fall again. It's good to die for one's country in Israeli society. So maybe critical of where we are today versus where we were a generation or two ago. You, of course, in Tel Aviv, will be confronted with street art that talks about, or that raises the issue at least, of Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And you got one artist, it's the same guy, Kislev. In fact, yes, there's his signature. Can you see it down below? There he is. There's the Peter Pan icon, right? The first picture that we saw. And he's got two figures on him. I don't know if you recognize either of them, but this guy is the one on the left. His name is Srulik, and he was made in the 1950s by an Israeli caricaturist, Dosh, D-O-S-H. He is the symbol of the Israeli Sabra, right? The Kova Temple, the dunce cap, and the short shorts, and the sandals, and the open breast shirt. Great. The symbol of the new Jew. This, on the other hand, is Hamdallah. Hamdallah is the symbol of Palestinian suffering and dispersion. And you notice you never see his face. He's kind of shrunken over, and he's dirty, he's barefoot. That is the equivalent in terms of Palestinian caricature of themselves as Srulik's Dosh, the artist, Srulik is over here. But here, what do you see? They're arm in arm, right? So Israel and Palestine, Israelis and Palestinians can be arm in arm rather than necessarily be in conflict. Here you see the Hebrew word that says Chai. Chai, of course, is life, right? Am Yisrael Chai, L'chaim. Great. But what are the colors used in the two Hebrew letters? The Yud, blue and white, are the colors of which flag?
Israel.
And the black and the white and the green and the red are the flags of the Palestinian Authority, the Palestinian territories in the West Bank. So you've got someone saying you can live within these two narratives or with these two colors. So you're not going to see this kind of stuff in streets in Jerusalem. Another picture by another artist around the corner, actually, is this image of two women. This is an Arab traditional woman, and this is a Jewish traditional woman, and it's created by, it's like paper mache, it's newspaper clippings, and they're both crying. They're both crying because they're both mourning a loss of a son, right? Maybe an act of violence this way, an act of violence that way, but the universal commonality, and it's very hard to actually see who is who. But you can tell by the way the hairdress is over here. She's Arab and she's an Orthodox Jew, both mothers unified in their mourning and their sorrow of children, maybe, or spouses who were killed as a result of the conflict. And then you've got this other piece, which is a stencil, which says, Ein Aravim, right? It says, no Arabs, or we shouldn't have Arabs, essentially. And then somebody else came and put underneath it, Ein Chumus. Without Arabs, there's no Chumus. That's not quite true, because there are Jews who can make hummus as well. So one person comes and says, get rid of all the Arabs, you don't need any Arabs here. But another person says, hey, you know, I'm going to create another stencil, which is going to look like it's part, but you can see it's different, right? The lettering. I mean, this word here, ein, and this word here should be the same, but they're different because they're two different stencils. And this was, oh, if you're going to point out something, oh, we got to get rid of the Arabs, we're going to say, well, there's something good. One good thing that we all can recognize is great hummus. So if we don't have any Arabs, guess what? The corollary is we're not going to have any hummus. Ha'am neged sipuach. The people are against annexation. Annexation of what? The plan in January of 2018 of Prime Minister Netanyahu to annex part of the Jordan Valley and make it part of Israeli law as a response to the Trump administration peace plan launched in January of 2018. And then it says something fascinating here. It says, Gam Tel Aviv zeit nachlut. Tel Aviv is also a settlement. I have this all the time. So, Mike, tell me about the settlements. I don't get it. The settlements are this obstacle to peace. Oh, what is a settlement? So you show them something. Oh, that doesn't look like what I thought it was. You're right, because many of them are towns and villages. But keep in mind, the artist is saying, don't just think that anything built in the West Bank post-67 is a settlement. Yeah, because Tel Aviv, built in 1909, land bought from Arabs, is also a settlement. It is. It was. So there's no distinction. There should be no, the person who put this up there, there should be no distinction between Tel Aviv or Israel pre-67 and Israel post-67. One of the most famous pieces of art in the neighborhood is this. This is the, I think, what they call the 27 Club, if I'm not mistaken. All these famous artists who died at the age of 27. I'm not sure why they all died, but most of them did not die. None of them died of COVID. But you've got Amy Winehouse over here, and Jimi Hendrix, and Keith Moon, I think, from The Who, and Jim Morrison, and Janis Joplin, and this is the artist himself. This is the guy from, what's the Seattle grunge band? Kurt Cobain. Kurt Cobain. This, I'm not sure who this guy is either. But so there is a picture I took. And then about a year and a half later, I came back to the wall, and look what's happened. All this area in the middle here was covered up by all sorts of other tags and over here and pieces of street art, etc. So things change, but yet nobody's really touched this. Somebody's put something up over here, some eyes and a little bit of, this is actually like a 3D piece. It looks like slime up on the wall in different places. So they're still cognizant of trying to keep the 27 Club there. Why the 27 Club? Again, they're not Jewish. Well, Amy Winehouse, actually, I should say, was Jewish, and so is Jimi Hendrix. No, Jimi Hendrix wasn't Jewish. Anyway, he had a Jewish friend in Seattle. It's true. Went to Garfield High School, where my cousins went to school, but he was not Jewish. But it's saying something about, you know, the fast life and drugs and musicians, etc. Politics, of course, is a conversation. The wall. Here you see a picture of the guy who is today the minister, what is he? The Minister of Finance, Avigdor Lieberman, leader of a far right, or right of center party, I should say, who is a member of the government, originally from Moldova in the 1980s, very hawkish. And when he was in the opposition, he was critical of the government. He said the leader of Hamas in Gaza, Ismail Haniyeh, had to be killed. He says, if I was defense minister, within 24 hours, no more than 48, we would kill the leader of Hamas. And what is the street artist telling us? Guess what? You were defense minister. In this picture, he is actually, he's not anymore. And Ismail Haniyeh, where's a picture of him? Here he is. This is him. He's still alive. He's in Qatar. He's still alive. So, dude, you're making these political promises that you're going to be tougher against terror and you're going to get rid of the leadership. But hey, you're the defense minister now. And guess what? You see things differently from the position of the cabinet minister than beforehand. And here is a criticism. Look, Tel Aviv, as you probably know, is a very liberal, open, LGBTQ-friendly city. 40 miles up the hill, Jerusalem is this very conservative city. The only thing they agree on in Jerusalem and amongst the Muslims, Christians, and Jews is their antipathy to Pride March, whereas in Tel Aviv, Pride March is this big, big celebration of 250,000 people. So for a while, under the Netanyahu government, the Minister of Culture was this woman. Her name was, or is, Miri Regev. She's not the Minister of Culture anymore. And she was quite conservative and quite critical of the artists who are centered in Tel Aviv. And generally, the art community is much more liberal and open than the political right would like. And the critics of her, she was very critical and cut funding for a lot of what she saw controversial things like Jewish Arab theaters or whatever else. They called her, instead of Sarata Tarbut, which is the Minister of Culture, Sarata Tarbut. So the Minister of Culture I wrote here is, in Hebrew, for those who read Hebrew, definitely, at least Rick, Sarata Tarbut. And here it says the calamity or the sorrow of culture, Tsar, like tsuris, you know the word tsuris? Oi, vat tsuris? That's the same root. Tzara is the calamity or the sorrow. So it's a pun in Hebrew about the tzarat, or the minister of culture. Here we've got a famous picture, unfortunately, which was made, the first street art really in the area in the late 1990s, of Yitzhak Rabin being shot by the murderer. There is the gun from a picture that somebody took, and here is Rabin, here's the murderer. And what does it say underneath it in Hebrew? It says, me, and there's the picture you can see, right? There's the assassin. There's the, I don't know what this is. There's the assassin, and there's the prime minister. And the Hebrew translates into English as who's next. So yeah, don't think it's over. We've had a political murder not that long ago, but who's next in line? And unfortunately, a lot of our Supreme Court justices have a lot of security, as do a lot of politicians. Unfortunately, there's still people who believe in the bullet rather than the ballot. Religious issues come up a lot. Here you see an amazing stencil, and it says in Hebrew, "Ve'avta l're'echa kamocha," right? Leviticus, the priestly code, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. What do you see in this picture, though? Who are the two people making out in this picture? Ultra-Orthodox man and a less Orthodox man, right? It's two men. You shall love your brother like yourself. Well, that's the Bible says. So my interpretation is that means that men can love men as well as men loving women, right? And then you've got this series of ultra-Orthodox Jews you can see wearing the fur hat with all sorts of decoration, and it's written in Hebrew with biblical script, with vowels, and it says, Vayatza perach v'yatzat yatzitz, and it says the flower emerged, and Moshe El Festival Darom Adom Yaitz. And it rhymes, and it says, and the flowers came out, and Moshe went down to the southern festival of red flowers. So yeah, ultra-Orthodox, not made by an ultra-Orthodox person, because the other piece, which appears very close to it, same figure, a little bit of a different hat, not a fur hat, but a felt hat, but it's in army camouflage. And what does it say? It says, Ech naflu giborim. It's a quote from the book of Samuel, the second book of Samuel, the opening line, the funeral dirge, the eulogy of David over the loss and the death of King Saul and his sons, including David's best friend, Jonathan. How the mighty have fallen, it said not in Gat and tell it not in Ashkelon. Right, so it's biblical. And then the line underneath it says, Me'yom lo mishtamtim. From today, we no longer try to get out of military service. So it's a critique from someone not ultra-Orthodox saying, how the mighty have fallen, you guys are above the law, right? Guess what? You too have to serve in the military. So clearly issues that are prevalent in Israeli society. There is a synagogue, a few of them in the neighborhood, and I like this one because you can see there is a Chanukiah on top, and a couple of them are broken. Yeah, it's Israel, it doesn't have to fix everything, but you would not have that. I know. I've been to your synagogue. In your synagogue, or most other synagogues, I want a light rabbi. We have to have a committee and fix it, and fundraising campaign and a capital campaign. Might as well do the whole facade. But it's there. It's like for years the thing has been broken. Nobody cares about it. And on the side of the synagogue, I don't know if you can see, is a lot of street art. This is it. This is from the side of the synagogue, and you'll notice I'm telling you, in America, it would be like nuts. It would be a horrible crisis. What, someone put art on the side of the synagogue? It's a beautiful white synagogue, but it's an amazing Japanese architect. Anyway, I've been there. This is the entrance to the temple. On the side of the synagogue, right? What the artist thinks the temple is actually going to look like. And there's some Hebrew writing up there. It's clearly Jewish, but it's on a synagogue. Another issue that has come up in Israeli society is how do we relate to the other? The asylum seekers, refugees. There was a big issue in the past 2 months from Ukraine. Do we take Jews? Do we take non-Jews? We take some non-Jews as well, but not huge numbers. And in Hebrew and in English, we were all once refugees. Remember, we were slaves in Egypt, and that experience should inform how we are today. This is complicated, how we look at the stranger amongst us, the minority amongst us today. And this is a very complicated piece of art, a quote from Lady Liberty, right? Give me your tired, your poor. And guess what? Jews in America, hey, we were welcomed into America, although not always, but don't tell everybody that. But we, the English speakers at least here, recognize the importance of immigrants into countries and minorities. And so there's another piece, part of that actually, Ki gerim haitem be'eretz Mitzrayim, right? It's graffiti that says, you are strangers in Egypt. And here you can see Jewish immigrants. Maybe there is Tsar Alexander II, who was assassinated in 1881, leading this massive exodus of Jews from the Pale of Settlement to North America between 1880 or so and 1920. This picture is a stencil. and it says Al Tagaresh Oti, or Hebrew and English, don't report me. Anybody recognize that image from anywhere?
It's a famous image from the Holocaust. But
Particularly the young boy at the end of the Warsaw Ghetto uprising. So the Israeli artist is invoking this universally recognized image of this young boy, who I think survived the Holocaust, by the way, and don't deport me. I'm a child born of asylum seekers, refugees. You can argue what they're defined by your society, but don't deport me. I'm a child born here. So it's an issue. Less of an issue today because many of them actually went back to Africa, and there's now a security barrier, so you can't walk from Africa via Egypt to Israel anymore. So there are fewer and fewer in Israel. But we have lots of foreign workers, people who apply from Thailand for agriculture, from China we saw for construction. Across the street from the synagogue, beautiful art, clearly telling the story of Israelis of Ethiopian origin, or maybe just Ethiopian Eritrean foreign workers who are working here as well, right? This looks clearly like a case, a religious leader in the Jewish community, and this could just be a woman from South Tel Aviv, strangers amongst us. Some other great pieces I've picked up over the years. This one on the left, you can read the English, danger, highly explosive dynamite. And this, of course, is a dove with a olive branch, very biblical, right? Noah's Ark. The raven goes, comes back, nothing. The dove comes up the olive branch, land ahoy. Ever since then, olive branch and dove, symbol of peace. But what happens when this dove leaves that thing? He's going to fly up, and guess what's going to happen? It's going to explode. Right? So we're living in this very fragile reality where we hope for peace, but yet any moment we're sitting on this tinderbox that you make the wrong move and boom, everything blows up. Or maybe the fragility of peace agreements, right? Don't fool yourselves. Yeah, you got the dove, it's great, but any second, the whole thing blows up. Or this is the same artist, I think, who had the sheep going to the slaughter to the McDonald's. Why are you thinking? No, what are you thinking, right? Social media, how much time do we spend on it? And this is a neighborhood where there are a lot of young people, and there are messages that are being communicated throughout the walls. A couple other more straightforward ones. Hebrew, it says, Na lo letzeyer al akir. Please don't write on our wall. We live here. It's a house. We don't want it. Or this one, which is the blue house, habayta kachol im hatri salavan, with the white shutter on the door, right? Just very clearly, this is where we live. That is only art that I want to have, I'm agreed to have. And the artists/taggers respect that, which is amazing in that neighborhood. COVID also started to raise its head in street art. It says, until when? COVID-19. Another one over here that says, you can see over here, big hug. No hugs. She's not allowed to hug. She's a kid going to school. She's wearing her mask. How long are we going to have to deal with this COVID thing? And you got over here, COVID-19. But it was amazing that there was another thing up here with the COVID, whatever, icon image. And then it says in Hebrew, Shum davar lo tachat shlita b'diuk kmo tamid. It says nothing is under control, as always. So it's not just Corona. This is just more of the same. Government is inept. Government is corrupt. Nothing is, and don't fool yourself. It's not just that this Corona is driving us crazy, but in general, there's nothing really that is under any control. Street artists make some crazy pictures which don't necessarily say something. Maybe they do say something about smoking or something about drugs, perhaps. This is a street artist who I've been many, many, many times. His name is Nero. He's also a tour guide, and he lives in the neighborhood. He is an artist, and he takes groups on tours there. And here he's pointing to one of his stencils. There is a square in northern Tel Aviv that is called the Rabin Square. You might have been there. It's where Rabin was murdered or shot fatally on November 4th, 1995. And it used to be called the Kings of Israel Square in front of the municipality building. And then lots of political protests over generations there. And after Rabin was murdered, it went from the Kikar Malchei Israel, the Kings of Israel Square, to Yitzhak Rabin Square. But this guy, Nero, decided in homage to the queens of Israel, queens as in the LGBT community, that they would pay homage by renaming, not officially, but on his signs, it would be called the Malkot Israel, the Square of the Queens of Israel. And here he put a picture of Netta. Netta Barzilai won the Eurovision Song Contest a few years ago with their song, I'm Not Your Toy, which is kind of this protest in the height of the Me Too movement a few years ago. And so he wanted to celebrate her success on the universal stage that made Abba so famous. She's actually quite famous now in Israel, of the queens of Israel, not just the kings of Israel. He, Nero the artist, is the guy behind that "Oh my gosh." Right here, it's not a stencil, but many of the other ones are stencils. You can see it in lots of places. I just love some of the street art because Tel Aviv is a city defined by the beach. And of course, if you are religious and you live in Jerusalem and you want to surf, you got to come to Jerusalem. And actually, there are probably some Orthodox people who surf, a few maybe. I'm here a picture of the artist with a Haredi, ultra-Orthodox person surfing. In fact, there are lots of beaches in Tel Aviv, as you know, and each one is a different character. So one in the south near Jaffa is a beach for dogs. A lot of Israelis have dog phobia, so you want to bring your dog to the beach, go to this beach. And then a little bit north is where a lot of the Arabs from Jaffa hang out. And then further north is a beach called Jerusalem Beach, which the city dedicated. I mean, they're all public beaches, but the city dedicated to Jerusalem because 40 miles up the hill, there's no beach there. And then a little bit north of that, by the Hilton Hotel, is a gay beach, and then just a little north of that is a ultra-Orthodox beach that's separated between men and women. So there's a mechitza that goes about 100 yards out into the water, so you can go there, and it's only at certain times. And so lots of different beaches in Tel Aviv. Even there's some ultra-Orthodox who surf. Camels, of course, don't necessarily surf, but they help you schlep your surfboard or your whatever boards you have there. Another motif, another artist's motif, is using these cans that he or she has used to create the street art. And it says here in Hebrew, and then they write something. So they put them up high, so you can't take them down. They're empty. And it says, Machshavot Yotzrot, what does it say? Yotzrot Chaim or something like that. It says, thoughts create life, right? The importance of creativity. There's another image of, this is a real life, this is a cat. It breathes, and this is a motorcycle or a scooter, and in behind it was this image. I was just standing with a group and I saw this and I loved that. And this was part of the wall that I showed you beforehand. And here you can see the same artist with the cans. Here it's easier to read. It says Hayakum, or the, what is Yakum? Yakum is the universe. Maria salutes or recognizes. La Ma'asim recognizes deeds or actions. So what is the artist referring to? Maybe he or she is referring to the actions of street artists, putting up on the wall the writing that give us a sense of what those issues are in Israeli society. Israeli-Palestinian conflict, politicians, economic issues, corruption, political murder, all of those things that we've talked about, drug, whatever, all of those are issues. And so take action, write something, motivate people to be brave and kind. What's interesting is that you'll notice this Be Brave and Kind stencil. What's the number on the left-hand side?
The year?
What do you mean the year, Rick? We're in 2022.
The year it was done. The year it was.
The Hebrew calendar year. So we are in what?
That's what I said.
782, right? It was written 5 years ago. And actually, this is the bottom of Sandy Koufax. I didn't put Sandy Koufax on there, but you recognize him. But there's a guy who did street art on the facades of the Machane Yehuda market in Jerusalem, Elia Sousa, who moved here from France a number of years ago, and he put a Sandy Koufax there, and he wrote the year that he made it. So we recognize 5772. I can guarantee you a lot of Americans who I take there. What is it? Was that the World Series that he didn't pitch in? No, that was Don Larson, something else. Anyway, but that's the Hebrew calendar year. The artist made it. Tikva, the hope, or our national anthem. Achrayut, responsibility. Achva, brotherhood or sisterhood. Shivyon, equality. And ahava. All these things we can say, fantastic, but this is the statement that the artist is saying. Hey, it's probably the same artist based on the color over here, I'm guessing, but I could be wrong. But these are the things that we should be striving toward. Forget our political differences, but love each other, be responsible. And then, of course, another artist wants to remind us of our own humility. Atarak ben Adam. Remember, dude, you are only a person. Don't think that you're godlike. Don't think you're greater than anybody else. You are only human. And then there's one street art, which I love, but I still, after all the years of talking about it, I can't figure out what the artist is trying to tell. Oh, wait a minute, there it is. Life is complex. Now, it's Scrabble. We recognize it, and there are different points for it, obviously, but it's in English. So they're saying something also about the use of language. It's not just what they're saying, it's the use of the language, the style of the font. Is it Hebrew translator? Is it English translated into Hebrew? Is there biblical language involved? If you want to quote the Psalms, then make it look like it's biblical writing, right? And Joseph put on his multicolored, his amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat and went down to the market and had hummus, what we saw at the beginning. Another great axiom I live by, Tiu Tovim, be good. And finally, I think this is the last one, yeah. And finally, this guy who just, the artist, was in love with the 80s. So, I love the 80s. You can see the clothing that he's wearing back then and the boombox that we all used to carry around with us back then about 40 years ago. But hopefully, I've given you a bit of a sense of some of the issues that are prevalent in Israeli society, that are priorities that must be discussed, must be literally put up as writing on the wall to allow people to understand what those issues are so that we can maybe move forward and affect change. So it's not just graffiti, not just people tagging themselves, but a huge amount, a very diverse collection of issues presented by mostly probably young Israelis as the writing on the wall in the city of Tel Aviv. And with that, I turn over the questions.
Mike, I'm going to let you keep going with questions, but I'm going to preempt. I'm not going to cut them off. I am going to say thank you, though, in case I get cut off the end. Thank you so much for all the wisdom you and insight and humor you have brought to all of us. I've been able to be in on some of your classes, which has been really, really fun because we don't always get to learn. We get to teach a lot. And thank you all for joining us. I'm going to turn it to Mike to ask questions. And everyone have a great day, and I'll go work forward to peace and art and beauty. And we look forward to seeing you. I don't know. L'shana haba b'Yerushalayim, b'Tel Aviv, b'Aaretz.
Well, I'm talking to Rabbi Geffen about this, but I'm probably going to be in Chicago in September, so I might see you beforehand. Not in, even, well, it doesn't preclude B'Shana B'Aaretz because it'll still be this year. It'll be before Rosh Hashanah. So who knows? Anyway, thank you, Rabbi.
Great. We'd love to welcome you and turn it to questions.
Please, if you have any. What would you guys put on the wall? How about that one? I'm going to ask you all a question. You guys always ask me questions. Is there something missing?
Is this really just something that happens in the Florentine neighborhood in Tel Aviv? I mean, is there a...
No, there are other areas in Tel Aviv where you see it, but there's this crazy concentration because it's going through gentrification, and because the population that lives there. I mean, you could really define it by 3 or 4 streets on all 4 sides as to where it really heavy. I mean, you literally, almost every building has got this art. And there are places like that in I understand, in Miami, sometimes sanctioned by the municipality, sometimes not, that just become this epicenter of people raising issues and putting up things on the wall that are statements about what they think about what's going on in society. I live in this boring suburban community, Modi'in, between Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, and there is zero street art. There's also zero graffiti here, unusual, but there's nothing on the walls whatsoever. In Jerusalem, you see almost nothing on the walls, and in Tel Aviv, only in certain areas that are run down, waiting gentrification, and that you don't have that in most other parts of the city of Tel Aviv. And 15 years ago, you wouldn't have seen any of that. I don't know, when's the last time you were here, Rick?
2008.
Yeah, I think then you were having a little bit of it, but I don't remember seeing much more before.
And is it also just partly just the architecture of the buildings that are in the area? I mean, I'm guessing
the architect, the fact that they're neglected and that there's this low industry of these carpentry shops and not fancy buildings, and the further north you go, the more affluent the city is, and you really don't have that on tall luxury apartment buildings. It's on these low rundown areas. There are other parts of Tel Aviv I've walked through where you see stuff like Nachal HaBinyamin, but nothing compares to that concentration in that particular neighborhood. If you were to look at street art if you were to have the equivalent of street art in America, I don't know if you do in Chicago. There's a ridiculous amount of graffiti, on the trains and on walls and everything. But if you were to have street art, I'm curious what the street art would be there. So there's political stuff here. There's not a lot of, well, there was a little bit of right of center politics, but most of it, because of the city Tel Aviv, because of the neighborhood, because of the artists themselves, it's much more left of center liberal critique, right, than the other way around. Um, it's interesting. I mean, there was just a little bit of right of center stuff. There was the piece of Tel Aviv is also a settlement, you know. But the first time I actually saw the If I Forget Thee, O Jerusalem, It's Because of Tel Aviv was actually across the street from the Machane Yehuda market in Jerusalem. I was like, wow, what's that? And then I saw it all over the place in Tel Aviv. So it's someone, I guess the artist had to feel that he or she had to put one up in Jerusalem. Say, oh, by the way, I'm not here. It's because I'm down over there. Whereas in Tel Aviv, hey, I came from Jerusalem, and that kind of tension between the two cities is expressed by the artist. But you don't see anything about gun control. If you think of the main issues in American society, unfortunately, after the tragedy in Buffalo and every day it seems like in America, there's nothing about gun control because gun control is a non-issue here. There's nothing about Roe versus Wade because it's not an issue here. You get an abortion in Israel through a committee in a hospital. There's nothing about socialized medicine. Hey, we all deserve to be, I mean, that is, it's nice we have a constitution that protects free speech and a right to bear arms, but how about our right to basic health conditions, right? You don't have that in Israel because there's socialized medicine and nobody's debating it. So the issues that you have are different than in America. There's some similar ones, but I think there's a much greater difference. And I would bet that if there were areas in Los Angeles or in Miami Beach, I know, and there are a couple other cities I think in America who have these kind of street art centers, then you'd probably see some similar, but probably even more different issues.
I think it would be in America, it'd be a lot more about multiculturalism and politics.
Or the binary nature of the divisiveness of within America today, right? Possibly, which is, I mean, I from here and you from there. I was in a hotel in the Galilee last night, and I'm scrolling through my 3 Israeli TV stations and Russian TV and German TV, and then you've got Fox News and CNN, and I don't have them in my house, so I'm like, oh, I'll watch Fox for 5 minutes and watch CNN, and it's like they're two totally different worlds, right? How they perceive what's happening in America as we speak, right? So Roe versus Wade on the liberal media is tragedy, and then Roe versus Wade on the conservative media is like, oh, look at all these radical leftists, they're going and protesting outside the houses of our Supreme Court justices. I mean, so crazy. Or there was a story recently. My mother-in-law is from New York, and she sends us an article from Fox News that says that people aren't riding the subway in New York because they're scared. There's so much violence and drugs and homelessness. The next day, I saw an article in the New York Times that said only 8% of New Yorkers are full-time back in office in Manhattan. And I said, oh, maybe that affects why there's low ridership on the subways in New York. Now, there are probably people who don't want to ride today because they don't go to work. And there are probably people who don't want to ride because there's violence. But it's a combination thereof. So when you look at different media, you see obviously